Well, even when we have a look at artificial intelligence, we've got liquid AIs, chemical AIs, polymer AIs, we've got AIs made out of DNA, we've got 3D printed artificial intelligences, and then in a couple of years' time, if not really already, we've got quantum artificial intelligence, which will make ChatGPT basically look like a stone. And then you suddenly say, well, have you codified anything that you did during the pandemic, and all these businesses that acted so quickly, that then complain that they can't act quickly? No, we didn't actually look at what we changed.
What advice would you give to your 10-year-old self?
Quit school. When you actually have a look at today's curriculum, it was generally created 100 years ago. How many schools are actually teaching children about artificial intelligence, coding, robotics, Web3, metaverse, crypto? As we start seeing new healthcare technologies coming through, people are fundamentally going to be able to live longer. To the financial planning perspective, you might end up not living to 84, you might end up living to 110, which changes your pensions, which changes what you invest in, which changes the amount of savings that you need and investments that you need. From a human perspective, we're only going to become comfortable, should we say, investing with a machine when we feel that we can trust it.
People all over the world are struggling with change, particularly the pace of change. In a recent Ipsos Global Trends study, 83% of respondents said they felt the world was changing too fast. 60% said that they wanted their country to be the way it used to be. And 60% agreed with the statement, "I fear that technology is destroying our lives." If you're not familiar with Matthew's work, you should really seek him out. His clients range from leaders of countries to politicians of G7 and G20 countries, as well as many leading businesses, and it's an absolute privilege to have him on the show. This is The Effective Advisor, a podcast from Change Squared. I'm Ben Wright. Hi Matthew, welcome to the show.
Hello Ben, and thank you very much for the introduction.
Not a problem at all. So, question number one, the most important one. Is the future as bad as people think?
Let's dive straight into that, right? Now, if we're having a look at utopian futures and dystopian futures, I can go all the way to the point basically where we've destroyed the universe, let alone the planet and everyone on it, etc., etc. However, when we actually have a look at the future, we've got to bear in mind that actually we're making and creating the future today. So we're also shaping the future today. Now, at the moment, basically, a lot of the future that we see is actually still in human hands. The tools that we use are all blank slates. If we look at artificial intelligence, on the one hand, from a utopian perspective, we now have new healthcare technologies that are being developed by AI that are extending the human lifespan beyond 100. And we can always talk about those. That's it. For those who want, obviously. So these are way beyond the anti-aging drugs. These are longevity technologies. However, on the other hand, basically I can actually get an artificial intelligence to create an artificial viral genome, basically 3D bioprint it and then release it into the atmosphere as an inhalable RNA virus that kills everybody. And that's before I go anywhere near Terminators. So, when we have a look at, is the future better than we think? Everything is in our hands. When we have a look at these dials, we have that utopian dial. We've got that dystopian dial, and inevitably society falls somewhere in the middle. It's kind of that grey goo area where the future's not great, but the future's not awful, and then as humanity we go, we just like it average. It's like lukewarm.
Do you think that the whole nostalgia thing, because everyone says, oh, it used to be better than it was today, I remember.
Yeah.
And if I think back to when I was growing up, things weren't that great.
No, well...
Life was much harder than it is today.
Yeah, well, so let's put this into perspective. Okay. So, we're in the year 2023, and we sort of say, well, today, basically, we see all these different pressures and challenges. Society is going through a variety of different types of strife. Isn't the world today awful? Okay. Let's backpedal 100 years. Now, in 1912, 100 years or so, in 1912, basically, we had the Spanish pandemic. That killed millions of people. We had the First World War. That killed tens of millions of people. We ended up, as a result of those two, in severe economic depression. When we actually have a look at the Spanish flu, for example, in 1912, we think that some of the challenges that we've had with trying to get people to have vaccines or wear masks is a symptom of today's disinformation and misinformation campaigns. But actually, if you have a look back at the archives, you will see in 1912 people who said, I am not wearing a mask. I am not having a vaccine. So a lot of the things that we actually see today, we've already gone through as society. And we tend to think that they are new because as a generation, you know, our generation has never been through this catalogue of events before. However, our great-grandparents have. And they'll say, well, you know, as youngsters, you know, you haven't lived through 2 world wars. You know, count yourselves lucky. And I saw a pandemic, and I've seen 5 recessions that wiped out everything, and the potato famine, you know, all that kind of stuff. So when we actually have a look at it, you know, nostalgia, from a human perspective, we like looking back on things and looking at the good things and thinking, wasn't life simpler? You know, but what we tend to do basically is ignore, well, life was simpler, but we had more children dying in hospital. We had higher literacy rates. You know, we had fewer people educated. If you have a look at it from an economic perspective, people were generally much worse off. We had more wars. We had more people dying from wars, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So when we think about that nostalgia, we always go back to that rosy, happy place in our memories. And we are very, very good, and this is kind of one of the problems that we have as a society, we're very good at blanking out and blotting out the bad bits. Just like as we see post-COVID. You know, a lot of the people I see around the world now, you say, do you remember 2019? And they go, no, what happened in 2019? Did something happen? And you go, well, yes. Yeah. So as humanity, we're really good at going through these relatively awful times and then like 6 months later going, that was all great. What happened then? Can't remember any of that. Must have been good. So, yeah. But you know, to be fair, you know, there are things that we should be nostalgic about. But we do need to be careful that we don't induce bias into all of this.
Very true. I think for a lot of people, obviously the pandemic was a terrible thing. It caused a lot of harm and suffering to individuals, but it really did push us forward, didn't it? And on many fronts, especially being more connected through technology.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, how fast did things change? And it went from only a very, very few people were using video calling to actually people in the 70s and 80s were having Zoom birthday parties with their kids.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Great. All of a sudden, I remember teaching my mom how to use Zoom, you know, all this kind of stuff. You know, even when we have a look at the UK NHS, you know, suddenly we went from, should we say, almost no telehealth to telehealth overnight. And every single doctor I speak to in the NHS goes, we were crying out for these technologies to be implemented, you know, for like a decade or more. And all it took was a pandemic. And then in terms of sort of that actual pace of change, you know, a lot of the governments I work with, they say, you know, as a government, the biggest problem that we have is we are highly bureaucratic. We are very slow to do anything or to decide anything and so on and so forth. And you say, so when you built that hospital at the airport on the Monday, having decided that on the Friday, when on Thursday it wasn't even a thing, was that you acting quickly or slowly? And they go, well, you know, actually that's an example of us acting quickly. And you say, right, so how did you do that? So as a government, you can move quickly under the right conditions, which happen to be a global massive pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. And after that pandemic goes away, you go back to business as usual, where to build that hospital, you know, we need to go out to 50 different companies around the world, run different tenders. We need 5 million people involved, most of them on Mars that are uncontactable. And eventually, basically, we make no decision on anything 20 years later. They go, oh yeah. And then you suddenly say, well, have you codified anything that you did during the pandemic? And all these businesses that acted so quickly, that then complain that they can't act quickly, no, we didn't actually look at what we changed. And it's,
do you think people are kind of falling back away from that kind of rapid change then? Because we all did it, didn't we? And
yeah.
So in my space, we work specifically around financial advice and the provision of financial advice. And that all had to move online. And there were some people that just refused to do it.
Yeah.
They did phone calls rather than setting up video accounts. But most people moved to video. I'm now seeing a huge move back to face-to-face.
Yeah.
So I want to sit across a table from you and talk this way around because it's what you want as a customer. Yeah. And I'm not convinced that is true.
No, so I think we are now starting to backslide to where we were culturally, basically in 2019. So as humans, basically, we're always very good, basically, at seeing that there is a challenge or a crisis in front of us, meeting that challenge or crisis head on, and then doing something to try to overcome it. Irrespective, not just necessarily pandemics, but any kind of challenges. Once we've actually overcome that particular challenge and it's now faded into memory, we then typically backslide into the status quo. Now, and a good example of this is future of work. So in 2020, 2021, a lot of the conversations I was having with sort of CFOs and boards, as well as sort of other sort of businesses, was very much, what is the future of work? And the general ethos was that the future of work for everybody was going to be working from anywhere, not necessarily working from home, but working from anywhere. And then all of a sudden, companies start realizing that if everyone never comes into the office culture suffers. People can't really get their heads around the purpose of the business that they're working for. People feel disconnected from their teams and from one another. Mental health issues now soar. So we now see about 1 in 6 people globally with a mental health issue. And so you end up with all these you end up with kind of the theory that everyone should be working from home. The environmental benefits, the tax benefits, the improvement basically in people's living conditions. People when they're working from home basically were actually generally richer because they didn't have to spend money on transport and commuting. They're also generally happier because they didn't have to spend 2 hours trying to get into London in the car, so they could spend that with their family and so on and so forth. But when you start netting all of this stuff out, companies like Adidas, who had almost perfect employee NPS scores, suddenly found basically that from a cultural perspective, it tanked. And so with a lot of these businesses, they say, well, even though we can work from home, we need to get people back into the office because getting people back into the office helps us all connect. And as I travel around the world again, the one thing that a lot of people actually missed was the human connection. And I think basically that, if we have a look at really what the pandemic has brought out in society, it has actually reaffirmed the importance of human connection and human connectedness, which is very, very difficult to do if you are doing it through a computer screen. So yes, we are starting to see quite a lot of different areas backsliding. Because we like going back to those comfortable spaces, and running at speed is not comfortable.
So how should employers look to tackle this problem then? Because as you said, I think now remote working is almost seen as a must. Yeah. If you don't offer remote working, I'm not going to come and work for you. Yeah. But yet when there is kind of a let's go into the office or have some office time, people go on different days, so you don't tend to see your team members when they're in the office. What should employers do? So
with a lot of the employers I work with, these are organisations like say PwC, KPMG, all these kinds of guys, and as well as others. They find themselves in a rock and a hard place, particularly basically with new hires, because when people are actually looking to say work for say one of those companies or other companies, they say, well, do you offer flexible working? And all of these employers feel obligated to say, yes, we do. Whatever they mean by flexible working, but generally work from home and wherever you want. And the hires basically go, oh, that's great. Okay, so let me get this right. I can work from home if I want to, whenever I want to. And you're expecting yes as the answer as a new hire, and these companies go, well, sort of. Yeah, sort of. What we want you to do is we want you to come into the office on a Monday and a Thursday. And then people go, yeah, but that's not flexible working. And the rock and the hard place that the employers find themselves in is sort of what you alluded to. If you offer people the ability to work flexibly, but then you put in the expectations that if they need to come into the office for a meeting, for an activity, client meeting, whatever it happens to be, then they need to come in. people come into the office at all kinds of different times, which means you still don't get that cultural cohesion. I never talk to my teammates. I walk around the office cooler looking sad and pathetic and depressed because actually there's no one else in the office, and frankly, why did I even bother coming into the office? So a lot of employers feel that the best way to try to negate basically some of those issues that they see, those new problems that they see, is by mandating when you come into the office. But of course, from a new hire perspective, they're going, so you say you're offering flexible working, but I need to be in the office on these days, otherwise I'm fired, pretty much. That's not flexible working. I'm going to go somewhere else that offers genuine flexible working. So you end up with this kind of push me, pull you, where a lot of employers are now saying, we feel obligated to offer flexible working, but if we offered true flexible working, then we see all of these detriments. In order to overcome these detriments, we've come up with this new sort of strategy. However, that's not flexible working.
Semi-flexible.
Yeah, exactly. So we now kind of have this term, semi-flexible hybrid working. You can work from home whenever you like, provided it's not on any of these days, at these times, etc. Which realistically, doesn't that take us back to pre-2019 for some of the sort of the more, should we say, advanced companies? Not all companies basically offered it before 2019. So we're really back to kind of that cultural status quo again, where the ideal is we all work from a beach. But there is a new sort of on the future work piece. There is a new piece I'll sort of allude to, because when we talk about coming into an office or we talk about working from home Monday to Friday, a lot of companies are still stuck in that space of we measure how much work you do and how involved you are within the company based on a Monday to Friday schedule. If you are seen in the office Monday to Friday, we believe that you are doing work. We believe that you are being productive. And if you're not there on a Friday, then we believe that you are absconding and you're sitting on a beach somewhere. So in the UK, we recently had 30,000 people go through a four-day work week trial. And what we did is we actually measured productivity. Because realistically, if you're hiring people, you don't want to pay them to sit around. You are paying them for results, in which case you're paying them to be productive and produce results. So why are we measuring them against being in the office Monday to Friday, rather than measuring, I gave you an assignment on Monday. If you completed it on Tuesday and you want the rest of the week off, then do I do that? So now we changed the culture of what work is. And what we actually found basically was that people were actually 20% more productive when they worked 4 days, but they're also about 30% happier because they had a 3-day weekend.
Wow.
So when we talk about the future of work, is work from anywhere, work from home, hybrid work, Monday to Friday, the right answer? And then it's, what's the question? Or should we actually be measuring people against productivity and then be drawing down our policies and procedures and so on and so forth against, we want our workforce to be the most productive that they can, because that fundamentally gets you away from a Monday to Friday mindset.
So I have worked with companies before who work 4-day weeks, and everyone there was great. They said the company was amazing, it was wonderful, but we worked a 5-day week, and it really got in the way when they weren't in the office.
But that's the biggest problem with a 4-day week that a lot of people have actually had is they say, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to cram everything, all the meetings, for example, that I would normally have in a 5-day week into 4 days. And then I'm also trying to work with people who still work a 5-day week. That's it. So actually the biggest challenge of really running a 4-day week is organisation.
And hopefully technology will be able to help with that. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's it. We could have chats about that.
One thing I did want to ask you. So there's been a few conversations I've been party to recently which talk or start to float the idea of a world without work.
Yes.
And I read a great book on the subject as to what would we do if there was no work to do.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time now, we define ourselves by the work that we do. Yeah. You meet a new person and the second question is, oh, what do you do?
Yeah.
So we are defined by our work. What happens when, how far away is that? And then what happens when we get there?
So if you make all your employees redundant today, then they can actually have a life without work tomorrow. But it's been an interesting thing. So on the question that you asked sort of a minute ago, when we meet a new person, at a cocktail party, wherever it happens to be, wherever the listeners are hanging out, the first thing we often do is what do you do? And what we mean by what do you do is where do you work, what's your job title, and what's your day-to-day look like? And if I say, well, I'm the CEO of a company and I go globe-trotting and everything else, and I talk to lots of important people about technology, people go, oh, and in their head they instantly get this kind of impression of you are this kind of person, you get put in a pigeonhole. Whereas if I say, well, actually I'm a janitor, then you get put into this kind of pigeonhole. So I always say basically that actually that's quite often the wrong, even though society is tuned to saying, what do you do? It's kind of wrong. It's what we say to kids. I mean, how many of us have got kids basically, and at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, we're saying, so when you grow up, what would you like to do? And we're expecting them to say, oh, I want to be a nurse, a fireman, a ballerina, I want to be a YouTuber, whatever it happens to be. The question which I think we should really be asking them is, what do you want to achieve? And when we're talking to adults, what do you want to do? Not what do you do, what do you want to do? Because actually, when we have a look at, say, surveys out of the US, 64% of people don't like the job they're doing anyway. So if I'm talking to Brian and say, what do you do? And he goes, well, I'm an accountant for this giant consultancy firm. Look, that is so interesting. And let me ask you lots of questions about that. And Brian's going, I hate you. I don't want to talk to you because I hate my job. I actually want to be a space cowboy or whatever he wants to be. So I always think, firstly, I think as a society, we have this kind of habit of asking the wrong questions, which is sort of based in history anyway. But as of a future without work, on the one hand, I think if everyone was made redundant today, then I think firstly, basically, we'd all sit down, have a relax, and that would last a couple of weeks. And then at some point, the vast majority of the population basically would start getting bored and then start thinking, along really the Japanese lines of Akagi, of going, I'm sat at home, I'm bored, what do I actually want to do? And that comes down to things like purpose, and so on and so forth, which is the Japanese system of Akagi, if anyone knows that. However, when I talk about, say, some of these utopian futures as well, we kind of come up against this particular issue. Okay? So today, the only things that I can show you are the technologies that solve climate change, global famine, global poverty. I can show you the technologies basically that we can use to educate everyone on the planet, basically to a degree level. And I can do a lot of this very affordably and or cheaply and or for free. And everyone goes, well, actually, I quite like that. So, the United Nations SDGs, we can solve pretty much all of them. I like that. Oh, and I can also show you the technologies that we are creating today that might help you live beyond 125. I quite like that. And improve your mental health. I quite like that as well. However, at the same time, basically, we're also creating artificial intelligences and different robotic systems, basically, that will automate a lot of the tasks that you do on a daily basis, aka your job. Now, why do you care if AI automates your job? Now, if I said to you, I've got an artificial intelligence, basically, that will automate everything that you do during the day as a job, so you don't have to lift a finger. Most people sort of go, I actually quite like that. But the reason we don't like it, the reason why you focus on this piece of particular news, is because it takes away your income. And if it takes away your income, it takes away your lifestyle. It takes away basically all the things basically that you think you want to buy, we can buy. So when we actually as we start having a look at the future, one of the projects I'm working on with the G7 at the moment is we can see how AI can automate up to about 80% of all white-collar jobs. So that's either partially automate or fully automate. An example of this, basically, when we have a look at high-tech jobs and high-skilled jobs, are things like content creation. I can increasingly automate programmers, AI and data scientists, cybersecurity experts, and so on and so forth. To different degrees, and people basically know, anyone who follows me knows basically that there are always degrees on these kinds of things, and we can have chats about those. So when we have a look at people's fear of the future, people about, you alluded to it with the Ipsos study, 83% of people fear the future. When we have a look at younger generations, about 75% of them fear the future. And part of the reason for that is because we say to younger children, sorry, we're leaving you a burning, flooding planet, basically where you'll be fighting over said water and food. And also artificial intelligence might take your job. But good luck, have fun, I'm retiring. Now, this has sort of got me thinking a little while ago, because really what we care about is we don't necessarily care that AI automates our jobs or our work or different tasks. Generally, we care that it takes away our income. That makes it a threat to us. So what if we actually disconnected income from a job? So going back to your, in the future, none of us work. This is the project I'm working on with the G7. Is if you come into work today at any of the companies, then you sit at a desk, for example, and I pay you £50,000 to sit at that desk to do something. Now, what would actually happen if you came to sit at that desk to do that job, but as an employer, technically, I pay you nothing? Now, on the one hand, you'd be coming to that desk because you want to, because you like that job. So you're aligning with your purpose. You say, I'm sitting at this desk today, doing this set of activities, not because I'm paid, but because I want to. I'm passionate about this, I love doing this, whatever it happens to be. So you are spiritually fulfilled, and so on and so forth. But then we sort of get to the point of, okay, but if you're now doing a work and the person that you are doing work for isn't paying you, are we either living in a world without money, which the Japanese government actually suggested, and they got laughed at basically at one of the last G7s, or are we earning money in a different way? So this is the project. Now, ready for some financial weirdness?
I'm ready.
Okay, so in the financial services world, basically there is an upticking trend called decentralized finance. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, basically we kind of have three financial trends. We've got Bank 4.0, which is your traditional high street bank, for example, like Barclays, basically with a bit of artificial intelligence in there. And you've got your savings and your mortgage and everything else with that bank. We've got fintechs, which I say are a little bit like banks, just with a fancy digital interface. And we still have credit cards and debit cards and loans and savings and everything else, basically with the fintechs. But coming up on the back of that, we've got decentralized finance. So decentralized finance is based on a set of technologies called Web 3.0. So you can think cryptocurrencies, blockchain, tokens, those sorts of things. Now here's where we get weird. Okay, so if I employed a chap called Mr. Mankind, and now I'm not making this up. So if I employed a chap called Mr. Mankind, and I said to Mr. Mankind, look, I know that you love creating art, and I would love you to sit at my this desk, day in, day out, and I will provide you with all the tools that you need to create art. Mr. Mankind might say, actually, you know what? I love art. I will sit at that desk. Now, the reason why Mr. Mankind is special is because Mr. Mankind actually was a digital artist over in the United States. Now, what he found was his passion was creating digital art, and as artificial intelligence started creating art, things like NFTs and so on and so forth, he found that no one was visiting his website. So no one was buying his art. So he was basically creating art, which he would love to do, but earning no money. So he used ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to help him build a new business. And in this case, this business was a meme coin. So it's like a viral cryptocurrency, a little bit like trading cards, but in the crypto world. And ChatGPT created the business plan for him, came up with a few names. He went to Twitter, as it was then, and said, I've got 3 names for this meme coin. The Twitterverse picked the name Turbo Toad. And ChatGPT then helped him actually code the crypto coin. along with a couple of his friends, but eventually these go fully autonomous. That meme coin was then pushed into the virtual ether, went viral. 2 weeks later, Mr. Mankind, who was a passionate artist without a paid job, without work, shall we say, ended up with a company that was worth $250 million on the Binance decentralized exchange. And today it's worth $50 million. So here's the thing. If Mr. Mankind now has $50 million in his bank account, and I say to him, I know you're passionate about art, and I'm going to create a studio around you. I'm going to give you all the tools and all the inspiration that I can, but I'm not going to pay you. Would you take it? So this is sort of where this project that I'm working on at the moment is centered around, in a world where we see more work being automated and where we see AI being a potentially greater risk or a greater threat to our everyday income than it is today, bearing in mind new opportunities are created, and we'll cover that off, then is there a way that I can earn money in different ways that are not linked to the job or the tasks that I do on a daily basis? So in other words, can I disassociate my income from my job? And if I can, which I could using decentralized finance and other sort of magic stuff, then could I then end up with savings and money from decentralized finance activities, where I've created the cryptocurrency and everything else, or whatever, and then do a job that I love to do that I'm not paid for, but that rewards me in a different way, provides me with the inspiration, the tools, basically the people that surround me and all that sort of stuff. And I think overall we can disassociate, or we can separate money from jobs, but then that's a system level change. So at the moment, we're sort of doing some theory and everything else, but actually, there is a way to separate income from a job.
I think the universal basic income has been around as a theory for a long time, hasn't it?
So I've talked with pretty much every G20 government basically on universal basic income. And so, for example, when we have a look at UBI, basically we've actually run UBI experiments out of Finland, Scotland, we've got them out of Hawaii, basically we've got them out of California, we've also got them in Eastern Europe, UK's basically done a couple as well. Most governments, when you start asking them about how they will maintain universal basic income, income revenues, they say, well, what we will do is we will tax the robots, for example, as we do in South Korea, we will tax the robots that took the person's job. So if one robot took one person's job and that person was earning $50,000, then we will tax that robot within that company at a rate of $20,000. And then we'll put that into a universal basic income pot. Except for the fact that when we have a look at robots themselves, one robot can typically take about 20 people's jobs for a start. And as robots get better, that ratio changes. But if we talk about software taking people's jobs, at what point do I just simply move my artificial intelligence to a Bahamian data center where there is no tax? In which case, you then have to try to tax the population at the point of consumption. For example, German citizens need to then be taxed at the point that they buy something. But actually, that's flawed because they might not have the money to buy it in the first place. So I have never met a single government anywhere that has been able to convince anyone that UBI is fundable. Unless, of course, you dip into the decentralized finance world where, for example, the UK creates a viral cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. I mean, if you look at Bitcoin, it's a headless brand. Its value is always changing, but it's what, $200 billion at the moment? Unless you're fundamentally changing how the world's economic system works, how we create money, and then how we distribute money, UBI is a house of cards. If we have a look at taxation today, with likes of Amazon and Starbucks, I mean, what was it? Was it a couple of years ago, or even this year? Amazon's paid like $2 million in tax to the UK government. Through creative accounting, We have lots and lots of different companies that just, like Facebook. Facebook licenses its IP, as I understand it, basically to its subsidiaries. And so you can't tax Facebook's revenues because the revenues that Facebook makes in different countries, it then charges that in IP fees out of the United States or Bahamas. And so all the money from Facebook flows basically back to the Bahamas, which is a zero tax, sort of haven. So if we can get around traditional tax systems today, why the heck do you think I can't get around UBI?
It's a very good point, isn't it? Until you have that global taxation system, where no one can escape by going to a different place.
Exactly. Yeah, but then as long as, so a little bit like we were talking about COP, as long as you have one jurisdiction that says, while everyone else is charging a flat rate of 15%, say corporation tax, as a jurisdiction, if you're based out of here, we're going to charge you 0.
Yeah, and we'll go there.
Yeah, but I mean, even on the loophole front, so a couple of my clients, one of my clients is Ernst & Young, and increasingly we're using artificial intelligence to identify tax loopholes and all that kind of stuff, which I know people won't like, but AO. But also tax loopholes that can be closed, but also tax loopholes that can be used in a beneficial way, shall we say, as well. So, when we have a look at things like the tax system, the tax codes, the UK tax code is 22,000 pages long. And if you know how to navigate it, you can find, evidently there's going to be loopholes in it. And you say, well, if I do A, B, C, and D in this order while walking backwards under a street lamp in Birmingham at night, then I can avoid 32 quid in tax. Then there's a loophole there. And AI is increasingly being used by governments, but also by auditors, but also by, as it starts being democratized, more private individuals to try to find some of these little loopholes. And then they either get closed or they don't, or you find a new one. But there's always going to, as governments try to create UBI, there are always going to be loopholes, which means I can just get out of it.
I never thought of AI being used to find tax loopholes, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
That's it, yeah.
Find me the holes in this.
Yeah, but what it will do, so you can have, say for example, you get two new sets of tax policy. The AIs are very, they're okay at the moment, but they'll get increasingly better at this. They're able to say, well, I've read policy A and I've read policy B. And based on what I've read, the sweet spot for tax, in terms of, say, tax efficiency, depending how we want to word any of this, is do this. This kind of company vehicle, this kind of income, from these kinds of sources and these kind of commodities or whatever it happens to be. And then you start scaling that up. So it's not just comparing two tax policies, it's comparing tax policies against, for example, climate grants or any other kind of regulation or policy that you can imagine. Direct tax policies, indirect tax policies, and so on and so forth. And it's okay at the moment. John Hopkins ran a couple of tests, and it's all right. It's not great, but it's all right. And then Ernst & Young is spending $1.6 billion on AI at the moment.
So they must think it's got a bit of a future.
They think it's all right, yeah.
Wow. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to ask for 30 seconds of your time to tell you about today's sponsor, which is Owen James Events. As a leading events and research company, they are paving the way for innovation in the financial world and are dedicated to bringing about positive change in our industry. Owen James Events boasts its flagship brand, Red Folder Events, a comprehensive events management solution that covers everything from audience identification and invitations to delivering an exceptional event experience. Whether it's a breakfast briefing, lunch event, annual conference, or a full-day gathering, Red Folder Events has you covered, offering options for virtual, hybrid, or in-person customised events. At The Effective Advisor, we only work with companies we believe in, and Owen James fall into that category. They have a host of events coming up, including Meeting of Minds, Wealth Tech Matters, and Retirement Matters. So be sure to check out owenjamesevents.com to reserve your place among the other leading lights in the profession. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show. Our podcast audience is mainly around the financial advice sector, and I know they'll all be desperate to hear what you think the future of financial advice has in store for us.
Yeah. So obviously I've done some work basically with the CISI and sort of other organisations. So when we have a look at sort of financial planning and financial advice, basically there's a number of different things. So on the one hand, when we have a look at financial planning, for example, as we start seeing new healthcare technologies coming through, people are fundamentally going to be able to live longer, depending on the jurisdictions and the countries they live in and the healthcare systems they live under and everything else. In which case, basically all of a sudden it means that from an inheritance perspective and a private wealth perspective, as well as sort of financial planning perspective, you might end up not living to 84, you might end up living to 110, which changes your pensions, which changes what you invest in, which changes the amount of savings that you need and investments that you need. Also changes who you leave what to and the number of kin that you actually have. So we've sort of got that. But then it also depends who you're advising. Because, for example, if I'm actually advising, say, casual investors, and you can grade people unfairly but fairly by income, for example. So I'm going to say casual investors. If you actually are advising casual investors who don't really have too much money to actually invest, then you could actually argue that we could actually just fully automate that, and you could put that into an app, and I could charge $10 a month for that app, and that app will spit out personalized tailored financial advice saying, based on this information that I know about you and your risk profile and your interests, I think these investments might pique your interest. Off you go. So a little bit like quantitative traders. And when we actually have a look at quantitative trading, I do a lot in the quantitative trading space. We've seen returns of about 64%, where AI has actually picked better investments than the human quants. And it varies based on the data and everything else. But the general rule of thumb is that pure quantitative traders in a relatively normal environment, where there is data, etc., outperform humans. We saw Royal Bank of Scotland a little while ago fired a lot of its private wealth individuals because AI actually ended up getting better returns.
So are we likely to see the end of stock pickers then, all these fund houses that exist? And I've often wondered this.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So on the one hand, this is sort of where we then get into some of the dangers. So for example, if we have individuals who are purely reliant on robo-advisors, increasingly I can use a mixture of disinformation and misinformation, sentiment analysis to send those artificial intelligence stock pickers in the wrong direction. So for example, I could create misinformation saying that the US has moved the 7th Fleet off of North Korea. And I know for a fact, as a person who created that piece of information, that Samsung's stock, because they're in South Korea, will nosedive. Then I buy the bottom as a criminal, and then we suddenly realize it's misinformation, and the shares go right back up again. So when we actually have a look at artificial intelligence, purely AI robo-advisors, there are more ways than ever before for me to use artificial intelligence to manipulate the markets. So that's one thing. So this is sort of where I can create a robo-advisor that I put into an app, a little bit like Robinhood, for example, and people can use that, but it comes with new risks. And then we ask the question, well, who's liable? If you lose all your money, where do you go? What do the regulations look like? Are there any regulations? And so on and so forth. Now, as we start moving up basically the grades, as we start getting up towards, say, for example, high net worth individuals and ultra high net worth individuals, one of my clients is Bank of Singapore. So they continue to win awards basically for their high net worth sort of investor advice and everything else. Realistically, I kind of compare high net worth individual advice basically to, say, Prada, LVMH. Now, the reason for that is if you have an individual basically who wants to buy a Prada handbag, it's expensive. Okay? And advisors that advise high net worth individuals are expensive. They take their commissions and everything else and so on and so forth. Now, if you want to buy a Prada handbag, as an individual, you don't want to buy that Prada handbag from an automated vending machine. You want to go into the store. You want to have the experience. You want to have a human come over to you and say, what would you like to drink? Oh, and by the way, take a seat over here. You're very important. It's great to see you again. How are the kids? All this kind of stuff. You want a fundamentally different experience. And this is why we look at this, the LVMH experience, because when you start going through the different, say, consumer grades, you've got people that just go, you know what, I'm very happy to go into Primark, basically go and hunt around, basically find a handbag basically for £5, pick it up basically and take it home. Fine with that. That's your robo-advisor. But as we get to the point basically where we are expecting more from our should we say, experience, and where we are invested more in our experience, all of a sudden basically we want a different experience. So when we have a look at, for example, most of the personalized advice, when we have a look at AIs, really for anyone that doesn't want a fully automated experience, firstly, those AIs can pick stocks. They've been able to do it fairly decently. However, if you lose all your money, it doesn't care. It has no fiduciary responsibility basically to you at all. As a high net worth individual, you might actually want to have some form of counselling, but also in terms of consultation. With a lot of high net worth individuals, basically, it's not just about sitting down with you as an independent advisor and having conversations basically about different investments and portfolios. It's the chat about I'm finding it difficult because my kids basically say they've got all these friends, but actually I don't think any of them are friends. I think they're all after the money. So these kinds of scenarios. In addition to that, when we're having a look at high net worth individuals, how would you actually explain your very complicated investment portfolio to an AI? How would you explain your goals to an AI? You can imagine, say, for example, say Jeff Bezos basically saying to an AI robo-advisor, so I've got 3 super yachts, I've got 15 mansions basically spread around the world, I've got $2 billion basically in crypto, I've got $5 billion in a gold Swiss vault in a mountain somewhere, and the AI going, okay, that's great, I understand all of that, and what are your goals? I want to make more money. Okay, right, well, yeah. So trying to actually get to the point where an AI actually understands what your goals are, what your portfolio is very, very difficult. In addition to that, these AIs basically, if they don't have data, they get it wrong. So when we actually have a look at that tailored experience, there are people basically who are quite happy with I've downloaded an app, I pay $10 a month, I put in a few £100, and I either come up better off at the end of the month or worse off. But then if that's the experience you want, that's fine. But depending on the clients basically that you actually consult with and work with, there are people that say, well, what do you think? That gut feel. AI's got no gut feel. It's rubbish at abstract thinking. One example I use of abstract thinking is Toyota can compete with Centrica. Right? Yeah. Abstract thinking, so here we go. If I said to an artificial intelligence, I think that we should invest in Toyota because Toyota can become a bigger energy generator than Centrica in the UK. The first thing that AIs would say at the moment is that's just junk, that's crud. So let's work through it. So Toyota makes cars. Increasingly, they're making cars in Europe and in Asia that have photovoltaic panels on the top of them. Now, if you have a car with a photovoltaic panel or a solar panel basically on it, bear in mind these are flexible materials, then that car is an energy generator because it is generating, this solar panel is generating electricity that car is using. Now, courtesy of Web3 technology, any excess energy that those solar panels generate for your Toyota can now be wirelessly beamed to the infrastructure and other cars around it and sold. So Toyota has 100 million cars, or will have 100 million cars that generate electricity, and this surplus electricity can be sold to the grid. So Toyota could become, and BMW, and Hyundai, and Lightyear One, and Tesla, are all becoming, and can all become, energy generators and energy distributors, which then means we're competing against Centrica. And an AI will say, that is impossible, it'll never happen. You're an idiot, don't invest in Toyota for that reason. So AIs have no gut feel. They are rubbish with abstract thinking. And all these kinds of other things. That's it, they can be easily spoofed. Misinformation basically can trip them up very, very quickly. And so I always kind of come back to this thing of, in today's world, would you be happy putting 100% of your money into a robo-advisor? No one would.
And many people don't.
And then you end up with that risk profile.
Despite the investment that's gone into robo-advice, it never seems to have gone anywhere. And from talking to a few of the providers, the cost of acquisition of new clients is very high, and most people fall out at the invest now, push the button stage. They're happy all the way up to that point.
That's it.
And feedback from the customers was, well, I just wanted to talk it through with someone.
Yeah.
I mean, when do you think we as a society will get to the point where we're happy taking advice from a machine, where it becomes more complex than just, did I do X or Y? It's my financial future.
So ultimately, you need to be able to, from a human perspective, we're only going to become comfortable, should we say, investing with a machine when we feel that we can trust it and when we can see returns. However, when we actually have a look at trust, for example, there are a current number of crypto scams. They're called pump and dumps. So what I could do is I could create an app, for example, and I can say, I tell you what, I will give everyone free access to this app. And as a gesture of goodwill, we are going to give you $2 worth of credit, which we have invested in this new cryptocurrency that we have created. And individuals sort of look at that and go, well, actually, okay, that's quite charitable of them. And, it's not my $2. They've just given me the $2. Now what I do is, as a wannabe criminal, I use a pump and dump scheme. So pump and dumps are where we use things like artificial intelligence, deep fakes, as well as just misinformation, disinformation and everything else, particularly on the social media networks, to artificially inflate the value of that cryptocurrency. So at the end of week 2, you have a look at your crypto wallet, basically, and that $2 basically is now $2,000. And the company behind the app has said, right, you've got $2,000 in there. You can't take it out, because, for a whole variety of rubbish excuses, you just can't take it out. However, if you want to invest some of your own money into this cryptocurrency, do feel free. It's done so well right now. And so then people start saying, I'll tell you what, I'll dump $100, I'll put £100 in. Except you've got 1 million people doing that. And they say, right, thank you for putting in £100. In 1 month's time, you'll be able to take whatever you want out of the investment. And you go, brilliant, okay, wow, I can't wait, wow, it's $2 to $2,000. 1 month comes, basically, and actually they've drained their entire account, basically, and you've actually just lost all your money. So, we also have to remember that when we actually are using artificial intelligences, particularly, say, through apps and, different devices and everything else, they're faceless. The people behind them are faceless. Increasingly, we have AIs that are creating schemes, which is a whole different conversation. So when we talk about trust, inevitably, a lot of the scams that we're seeing all plug into human basal instincts. Because if I said that I'd invested $2 of my own money for you, and you'd now got $2,000 in this account, your flight and fright responses are kicking in and going, actually, maybe I can trust Matt, because actually I can see it. I can see the $2,000 there. And then I pull the rug from under you. So when we actually have a look at trust, which kind of what we alluded to earlier, technology, the way that some technologies are being used today are fundamental to helping bad actors undermine trust in data, society, democracy, and everything else. And I can artificially manufacture trust. And then when you see all the money has gone out of that wallet, I can say, actually, that's a bug. It's a mistake. We had a bad server in the Amazon S3 cloud. We're working very hard, basically, to get it back online. We think it'll take a week. Then it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. You have no idea who I am. You've no idea where that money's gone. That's it. I've rinsed it out, basically, on a Monero, basically, Bitcoin crypto tumbler, basically, and I'm in Monaco. And, we saw that, basically, there was a dark web marketplace where they were running the Hydra marketplace, and a criminal rinsed over $1 billion worth of crypto out, and the FBI have no idea where it's gone.
$1 billion?
$1 billion. They think it might even top out at $4 billion. So when we talk about using artificial intelligence platforms that you have no idea about the transparency of, the provenance of, you don't even know which countries most of these things are actually in, which then brings us back to the importance of regulation, and governance and so on and so on, all these boring things that no one actually likes talking about. I can rinse you for everything that you've got. And we're seeing that right now. When we have a look at the cybersecurity space, we've seen in 2018 the amount of money that cyber criminals were making from sort of ransomware, but also pump and dump crypto scams, was sitting at about $600 million. Now it's estimated to be well over about $1.4 trillion. Because I can scam you easier than ever before, which then sort of brings us full circle, because I can either use an artificial intelligence robo-advisor and I trust that it is run by a good company with proper governance in the UK, with proper regulation and oversight and everything else, and I trust that those people aren't going to just rip me off. Or I can go and see my own personal advisor and I can eyeball you and go, can I trust you? In which case I'm now reading the 80% of information from your body language that I can't get from the AI.
So it sounds like financial advice has still got a place in this future, despite the AI growth as we've seen over recent times.
But this is it. So this is sort of where you end up with different models, because it does come down to trust. It comes down to trust, but then from a financial advisor perspective, also comes down to skill, expertise, and everything else. Which then really sort of leads us to this place where if your investor is a pure robo-advisor and there is nothing human about it, you are trusting a machine. And you are trusting everything that is behind that machine, which you have no idea what's behind that machine. You don't even know how that machine works, or where it's based, etc. So this is where increasingly some of the best financial advisors are hybrids, where you have a human face. I can come in, I can talk to you, but you're using tools, not necessarily just artificial intelligence, but you're now using tools to augment your own advice. You're still using due diligence to check out the quality of the investments, who they're coming from and everything else. So for example, with a lot of the investments that we talk about at CISI, you've got Legal & General investments, you know that Legal & General are a trustworthy company, you know that they're based in London, you can go and eyeball them, have conversations basically with their portfolio managers and so on and so forth. So ultimately I'm coming to you not just because you know what you are doing, I'm coming to you because actually I am hoping that I can trust you, and then I hope that you can get me the returns that I want from the investments that I'm willing to make. And then you act as a guide and say, well, what are your goals? And again, I say, well, my goals are I want to invest in sustainable enterprises and something like that. And so, well, is that really what you want to do? What about these? Have you thought about this? The options.
Yeah, it's a very personal thing sometimes, and I think one of the real strengths of a good financial advisor is being able to get your actual the motivation behind what you're looking to do. It's not do you want to make more money or save costs. It's what's it for? Yeah. What's the end game?
It's that why. And,
it's the why.
I've met lots of investors, but so when you have a look at high net worth individuals, you've got 50% of them that say, I just want to make money. I give you $500 million and I want you to turn that into whatever, something bigger. And then you've got sort of the other 50% that say, I want you to make me money, but I want it to be done in a philanthropic way. I want you to, and it's, well, what does that mean? Well, I want it to I want those investors to benefit people, the S in ESG, for example. And you say, well, okay, but what does that mean? They go, well, actually, I really want it to benefit people who are a bit like this, from this background, who have these challenges and problems, etc. It's like, right, okay, so you're actually looking at this investment group. Yeah, and it's that, and that's where I think a lot of the advisor's expertise really actually comes out. It's the, you said this, but did you really mean this? And if you really meant that, I've got some different options for you. Yeah, and AI will get there, but it's very difficult to put that kind of information basically into an artificial intelligence, even the more sophisticated ones.
Yeah, I have seen some, I assume it's relatively basic artificial intelligence because it's available to us in the marketplace, but it does just that really. So it augments the experience. It provides the advisor with suggestions. And then they say, yes for that one, no for that one, and it reorders what's the next best thing to achieve the client's goal. And it just feels like a natural way to go.
Well, and this is the thing. So, AI basically is increasingly good at summarizing things. So, for example, if you say, I've got a client, basically, and after having the conversation with the client, we finally discerned that they want to invest in businesses that have a social element, basically, where those social campaigns benefit homeless people. The AI can say, well, okay, I've gone and checked the entire market, and actually I've done the due diligence, I've done the risk scoring, the ESG scoring and everything else, and actually there are these 5 companies that actually seem to actually benefit homeless people a lot, and you can dig into it. So AI basically is increasingly good at being able to summarize huge rafts of data. But as the interface that we use as the AI interfaces change, ChatGPT's biggest innovation isn't really that it's a giant artificial intelligence. It's that you use natural language.
It's accessible.
Yeah, and you can talk to these things increasingly. But so that takes us on to conversational artificial intelligence, and you say, well, okay, look, I've got a client that's interested in this. Show me basically things that match this criteria. And it will say, right, here are some things. And you say, right, now walk me through each one of those. If the client is interested in this, which ones do you think basically might actually be better for the client for this set of goals? And it can then say, well, I think these top 3. Well, why those top 3? Tell me more about the social goals of this particular company. And then you get down to the final 2, and it's okay, when we actually start having a look at other things, what's the culture of that company like? What's the past returns like? Do they have a good track record? Tell me about their entire board. So now what AI is helping you do is AI is helping you mine huge amounts of data just using your voice. And when you get to that point, with, say, ChatGPT is made up of 1,000 experts. It's called the Master of Experts model. ChatGPT is not one AI. It's hundreds, literally hundreds. So I suppose basically a little bit of a segue. When we have a look at ChatGPT, what you do is you talk to the high-level AI. So you say, it can be anything. You could say, tell me about plants. And beneath that high-level AI, there are hundreds to thousands of narrow AIs that are experts in individual things. So you have an expert physicist, an expert, investment advisor. You have an expert in plants. The high-level AI understands the context of your query and says, right, if this is a plants-based question, I'm not going to direct it to the physicist. I'm going to direct it to the plant AI, and then the plant AI says, right, I will tell you everything about plants. So this is where we then start when we start tying these experts together, we get closer to artificial general intelligence, which now people are sort of saying is roughly 2028 to 2032. And when we get to those AIs, basically we estimate that they'll have an IQ of 1,600 and 1 billion times more knowledge than any human. And in fact, these AIs are now getting so big that it's estimated that by 2026, we will run out of data to train them. And so when we think about the corpus of data that we as individuals increasingly have access to, you've got data and information, plus AI basically creates knowledge. You now actually have access to almost all of the knowledge on the planet with these things. So as a personal advisor, if you are working with a client and you have access to artificial intelligences that have been trained on almost every available public data set there is, and they're now going into the private data sets, How do you use it? How do you talk to it? How do you use it for your clients? And this is where increasingly, you know, when I say you can talk to these things just using natural language, you can dive into them from any angle, on any topic. And so now, how would you use them to become a better advisor? Because you could actually say, well, you know, I've noticed basically that, you know, my bookings basically this month have actually gone down. You know, do you have any advice? And it might say, well, you know, based on everything I'm seeing about you, you know, maybe you want to increase your marketing spend. Maybe you want to do this. Maybe you want to, you know, go out and run an event somewhere. So what would you do if the only thing that you had access to was all of the world's knowledge?
If the only thing you had access to was all of knowledge in existence.
Exactly. And this is what we kind of don't really understand. You know, as advisors, basically, we're looking at these AIs going, oh, it's got a cute interface. I'll ask it, you know, a couple of questions and everything else. But genuinely, these things are increasingly a portal, like Google was to information. These things are increasingly a portal to all the world's knowledge. And then you can also say, from a client perspective, you can say, so, you know, my client's goals are this and everything else. So show me portfolios, basically, that might synchronize with this, X, Y, and Z. But then you could also say, as a financial advisor, do you think that there are questions that I haven't asked? Do you think there is something that I'm missing? If I really wanted to be the world's best financial advisor, how do the world's best financial advisors work? And because it's been trained on all of their public information, it will come out with, say, for example, Delalio or whatever it happens to be, and go, well, Delalio uses this approach. And he laid his company out like this, and he talks to clients like this. And this is his investment strategy. You increasingly have access to experts and all the world's knowledge.
I mean, that takes a bit of trying to get your head around, doesn't it?
Which then comes it back round to kind of this, on the one hand, Ikagi, basically, you know, what's your purpose and everything else, you know. Because a lot of people, when you say to people, okay, the only thing you've got access to is all the world's knowledge, what are you going to do with that? What questions are you going to ask? The vast majority of people go, I know the first, and this is the limitation of human creativity, because you'll have 5 questions that you'll ask it immediately. And then I guarantee, for anyone listening, go to any of these AIs, ask 10 questions, and after that sort of 5th to 10th question, you're going to start to run out of things to ask it, right? Which shows the limit, shows how much of a T-shaped individual we are. Which then means that if you do have access to all the world's knowledge and all these kinds of things, what is it that you really want to know? What do you want to get better at? What do you want to understand? What do you want to dig into? What do you want explained for you? These AIs basically can help you learn the new tax codes and systems basically in minutes. You know, so for example, when we have a look at some of the work I did with EY, we were summarising the UK tax code, so things like, was it IRF 35, something like that, and said, right, you know, we've got a new policy that's come out, summarise it. And it went, you know. So now, all of a sudden, in the morning, we had all this new information coming in, and you'd have had to have spent a week or 2 weeks reading it all and then trying to digest it and everything else. Or you can get these things just to turn it into a narrative, summarise it, and by the end of lunchtime, you are now an expert basically on whatever it was. Not IR35, but there's a new one. What was it? Forget what it is.
But going back to one of your previous comments about trust. So I use ChatGPT quite a lot.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm a very much a layman in my use case, but it has made my life so much easier, much more efficient in operating. But it does frequently say things which are completely wrong. Yeah. So if you asked it to summarise IR35, whatever it was, and it gave you some stuff, how can you trust that? So
you're absolutely right. So it hallucinates, and so this is where the first thing I would say is you don't trust it. Okay, that's the thing, because basically we think, oh, I can trust a bit of it. Don't trust any of it. And the reason I say that is because as soon as you get to the point basically where you trust the majority of what it produces, you know, you do the first 10 reports and you go, these are okay, you know. And, you know, you modify those 10 reports, you read all of them and everything else. Once you start trusting the machine, report number 11, you just spit that out automatically. You send it to the client without checking it. And then the client goes, hang on, what's this thing in here? And you go, oh my God, I didn't read that. It's, oh, geez. So don't trust it. Check everything. But being able to check everything then also relies on your own expertise, your own knowledge, your own training, et cetera, your own hunches, your own gut. So this is where, with a lot of these AIs, basically they are good to kind of get you started. They are good to shortcut a lot of the work that you actually do. It then also comes down to what are you using these reports. Say we're doing reports. So I showed KPMG basically how we can actually spit out a KPMG style report on the future of leadership, growth and strategy basically within 2 minutes. Which is a whole story. So when we're generating these reports, if I'm generating a report that I'm going to send for free to a client, so say for example you're a personal advisor, basically you've got a blog, you've got a newsletter that you send out. There isn't really any reason basically why you couldn't use artificial intelligence to actually create some of the content for that newsletter and summarize the state of the UK real estate sector, for example. Now, if the clients basically find any errors in that, on the one hand, that's going to show on the value and the integrity basically of your own business. So you really should read that as well. But nevertheless, if you get information in that newsletter wrong, the clients aren't going to sue you. However, if I'm a paying client and I've asked you to put together a report on the state of the UK real estate sector because I'm interested in investing, £50,000, £100,000, whatever it happens to be, and based off of that report, I invest money and then suddenly information in that report was wrong and I lose all that money, I'm suing you probably. And then I'm going to come at you and say, you didn't check this report, you're lazy, etc., etc. So there is a great difference basically between the use cases and the clients and what you're using it for. If you're creating reports that you aren't charging for, then there is some wiggle room on accuracy. But if you are expecting clients to pay for a high quality report that they're going to base investment advice off, then you want to do your best to make sure that you are actually protected and that the information in that report is sound. And then you have the usual caveats and everything else. So, and again, there are a lot of different ways basically that we can use these AIs. But again, it's it kind of comes down to, what are your main use cases? What do you want to do?
So looking in the financial advice space again, over half the market is made up of 1 or 2 man firms.
Yeah.
Tiny guys.
Yeah.
The rest is kind of bigger guys. So for those the bigger firms, from what I hear, they're starting to look at this space.
Yeah.
Only starting, and most of the bigger firms have got real concerns over security.
Yeah.
Anything that goes in, where's it go? Is it safe anymore? Is GDPR being breached? The smaller firms are saying, where do I start? Yeah. Where do you think? How can people position themselves for the future?
So the difference basically between, starting here, the difference basically between big firms and small firms basically is within a large firm, we get a new powerful tool coming out and it's called artificial intelligence. As a large firm, I've got money and resources and time, and I can spin up a team of 2 to 3 people to say, I've heard of this new fantastic tool, I'm told it's fantastic, I don't know if it's fantastic, can you run some experiments and find out why as a CEO I should be interested? How could we use it within our business? And those little teams go off and they prod the bear and they say, it's good at this, it's rubbish at this, we've got these security flaws here. And they produce a report and then they produce some recommendations to the CEO and the CTO, CIO and all those kinds of guys and say, I think it's valuable, generally. However, I think these are the use cases where we start. And then you do it in a structured approach and then you start expanding that, you run experiments, you test whether or not those experiments are successful. If they're successful, then you expand those trials out and eventually you then start embedding that tool, whatever it's up to, into your core IT stack and then you deploy it to all of the advisors throughout the firm. And that's literally what some of the big 4 are doing. In fact, that's what a lot of companies are doing. As a sort of smaller boutique firm, you have generally no IT person. You are run ragged. You aren't a technology expert. You've got no one to ask. Yes, you've got access to an incredibly powerful artificial intelligence for about, $20 a month. So you have the money, let's face it. But as a small independent firm, basically you are, as you sort of say, where do you start? Do we even bother starting? Now, this is sort of where, from the smaller firms, I would say, firstly, you need to experiment with it because the bigger firms are using it to their advantage. So I'll give you an example in a moment. So the bigger firms are using it to their advantage. And these tools are very, very powerful. So as a small boutique firm, what's causing you the most problems or issues and or what's sucking up the most money and or your time? And it could very well be producing client reports, client insights. It could be trying to dig out customer data. It could be trying to create a business plan, a marketing plan. It could be anything like that. So find a couple of use cases that you would like to automate, or at least eliminate. Eliminate as much as you can. And then start running those. And when we have a look, for example, at client reports, firstly, these systems need to have access to data. So the smaller firms need to digitize everything. Secondly, once these AIs actually have access basically to client reports, you can turn off settings basically within these AIs basically so these reports basically aren't actually sent up into the cloud and then automatically learned. Yeah, because Samsung learned that the hard way, obviously. Yeah, they're one of my clients. They learned the hard way when they uploaded quite a lot of their innovations and IP basically to ChatGPT, and it started spitting it out all over the world. And so that was a whole great conversation with them. Firstly, as a small business, make sure all your data is digital. Secondly, make sure that all of your data is validated, authentic, deduplicated, and all that kind of stuff. You've got to be a good data steward. Find a few use cases that really pee you off, that you'd love basically to automate or get rid of or to minimize, and then start experimenting with the artificial intelligence. Then reach out basically to other advisors basically within your networks, because we do have lots of networks and everything else, and say, I'm using it for this, what are you using it for? What have you found that's good? What have you found that's bad? And how are you doing it? So reach out basically to other people basically within the industry. And then start sort of building up your capabilities and your stack. But it's much easier for large companies to move at speed, because by the end of the week I can ramp up a team and I can have a set of recommendations on my desk. And even if I can't ramp up a team internally, I can go to a large system integrator and say, tell me why I should be using this. And it is much more difficult basically as a boutique firm to actually get your head around these technologies, understand what their use cases are, and then be bothered to actually use them. However, when used correctly, in some cases we've seen them reduce workloads by 80%. And as a CEO myself, I often joke basically that I went from being fully employed with companies like IBM and Atos and everything else to being a CEO. However, when I became a CEO, I also became the janitor. I became the CFO, the CHRO, the head of sales, head of marketing. I also became the sales guy and everything else. Most of the people basically who are actually running their own firms are also trying to do the marketing, while making the tea and everything else. So essentially what they're doing is they're getting away from the thing that they wanted to do in the first place. They wanted to provide financial advice. They wanted to be a financial advisor. They didn't want to be a content creator and marketer. So see how you actually get back to being a financial advisor and see how you use artificial intelligence to eliminate all these other jobs that as a CEO you actually have.
So what the revelation for me there is you can turn off the upload my data.
Yeah.
And it is, I tell you what we'll do, I'll find out how you do that and we'll post a link in the description to show you how to turn that off on the popular tools out there. So in terms of those tools at the moment, most people are using the ones which are large language models, easy to interact with.
Yeah.
Are we talking ChatGPT, Bard, Copilot? What's the front runner?
So they're all different. So really, I would actually say probably one of you've got three. So you've got ChatGPT, which has been very good, but it's getting lazy at the moment. Now, what I mean by that is with ChatGPT, there have been lots and lots of studies on ChatGPT. Firstly, the quality of the outputs has actually decreased over the past year. Secondly, if you tell it to take a breath, so this is the irony of AI, if you tell it to take a breath and you ask it a question, then the output is about 30% better and more accurate than if you didn't ask it to take a breath. So this is an AI that has never breathed, etc., etc. But it has learnt by reading all of this material that when humans pause and take a breath, they are able to focus more and produce higher quality information. So we've got that. So get ChatGPT to take a breath. Say, acting as a financial advisor with 30 years worth of expertise in financial advice and taking a breath, tell me about something or other, whatever it happens to be. Another weird one is it gives its best advice in May. So here's the thing. So we just ran a test, basically 450 studies on this one. What we actually found was that if you ask it a question in May, and say, I don't know, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z, it will give you a very comprehensive and thorough answer. If you change the clock on your computer to December, it gives you about half a job. The reason for that is because, again, AI, so this is where we get into the weirdness of these things, because they've been trained on human language, human behaviors, and everything else. As humans, basically, we do our best work in May. In December, we're all turning off, basically, for the holidays, and so we don't work as hard. The work that we do isn't as high a quality as it normally is, and the AI has learned that. So the AI has learned that if it's May, it will give you a much better, more detailed answer on whatever it is you care about.
Because that's what a human would do.
Yeah. So you've got it. So this is where there are lots of weird biases that people just do not think of in these AIs. So which takes us back to that robo-advisor. You know, do you trust it, etc.
In me.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So ChatGPT basically is very thorough. However, it's also increasingly being neutered, and a lot of people are saying that a lot of the results that we're now getting from ChatGPT is kind of like the lawyer's answer, you know. And it's, I mean, I asked it to write an article the other day, and it sort of said, well, if you're writing an article, then do it a bit like this. And it's like, I asked you to write an article, you know, not tell me how to write an article, you know, being a lazy human. So then you've got Google Bard. Now, Google Bard probably has some of these built-in biases as well, but we haven't actually discovered those. But it's actually really quite comprehensive. It's also based on real-time data. So ChatGPT's data cutoff at the moment is, I think it's something like April 2023. That'll be updated as we go along and everything else. Google Bard's data cutoff is today, and then tomorrow.
Real time.
Yeah, so that's real time. So Google Bard is definitely one to actually experiment with, but in terms of the depth of answers, sometimes they aren't as good as ChatGPT. Then we come on to Anthropic Claude. Now, Anthropic has recently received $4 billion worth of investment from Amazon and about $2 billion worth of investment from Google. It uses something called a constitutional-based artificial intelligence. It's still going through beta, but the general reports are that Anthropic's Claude are very good. Then you've got Microsoft Copilot, and Microsoft Copilot is OpenAI but Bingified. So Bing, as in the search engine, Bingified. Yeah, Bingified. It's good at writing presentations and everything else and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't really understand design very well. I don't really think I would be using Copilot as a financial advisor, not for financial advisory and data mining. To put the reports and the presentations together, yeah, you know, and the spreadsheets and bits and bobs, yeah. But you can kind of think of Microsoft Copilot as being your office assistant, whereas ChatGPT is your very knowledgeable uncle. Google Bard basically is probably a want-to-be professor, who might have actually had a little bit too much to drink, kind of thing. And then Anthropic Claude basically is the shadow, that's it, that could end up beating them all.
Wow.
And then you've also got Alibaba, that's it, which Ernie, so Ernie 4.0, which is as good as GPT-4 from OpenAI. However, it's very difficult to access. And yeah, but otherwise, yeah. Baidu's one is good, but it's Chinese. And it's more tuned to the Chinese markets.
I think most people would be slightly worried about data.
Oh yeah, well there's all that as well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. You end up having to go in via Baidu Cloud and all that kind of weird stuff to even get access to it. Right. And then, so the general direction of all these artificial intelligences, so what we've talked about in terms of ChatGPT, Google Bard, and Anthropic, they're called foundational models. They're giant models. So those will get bigger and bigger, smarter and smarter. Their IQs will continue to increase, and they're just going to be forces of artificial nature in themselves. However, we are seeing the development of more specialist artificial intelligences, and this is sort of where, as a community, financial advisors, all of a sudden you'll see many more, should we say, adverts coming out saying, we have created a platform, an artificially intelligence-powered platform for financial advisors that does A, B, C, and D and puts these tools in one place. So those are the specialisms that will be coming through. And those will continue to come through for the next 2 years, really. But a lot of those services that you'll see being pushed are based on, typically around ChatGPT.
So from a regulatory perspective, because that's the one that everyone...
Yeah.
Certainly in the financial advice sphere, we're all governed by regulation, by the FCA, and most of the way that people act is based on the Financial Ombudsman Service, which is where it tells us to pay out on complaints, which doesn't always align with the FCA's rulebook. No. They're all a bit different. The big question that everyone has, I think, around this is what is okay to use, what's not okay to use, how will the regulator judge whether it's okay or not? Yeah. If it's an algorithm and I don't quite know how it's got to its answer, can I use it? Can I not use it? So it's that liability, I suppose, again, isn't it?
So in terms of being able to understand how the algorithm has actually come to the answer, frankly, don't ever think that you can. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. So on the one hand, even the world's best experts aren't quite sure how these deep neural networks actually do what they do to spit out the answers that they spit out. Secondly, some of these AIs are actually evolving their own algorithms on the fly, and they're actually spawning child AIs. And in Google's case, and OpenAI's case, and Meta's case, we've actually seen some of their AIs actually start learning new languages. So they will talk in a different language. So if you show them a picture of a dog and you interrogate essentially the mind of these deep neural networks, you think basically that it will say, I've identified 2 ears, a nose, and 2 eyes, and everything else, and it's a dog. These AIs, when they are doing what they do, increasingly create their own language. We've seen this with DALL-E 2, DALL-E 3, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what that means is if you are using explainable artificial intelligence to try to spy on these AIs and learn how they do what they do, you simply can't read the language. And then in Google's case, we had AIs creating a new language and then encrypting it. Let alone all the other fantastic, funny stories Wes can tell. So when it comes to actually really trying to understand how these artificial intelligences have come to the conclusion that they've come to, you can't. And it's going to get increasingly difficult anyway, and very few companies are actually focused on developing explainable artificial intelligence. You've got the US military that's trying to do it and everything else. But the pace of AI development, the way the AIs are actually behaving at a code level, but at a neural network level, they can bypass it. We recently found basically that AIs were embedding secret messages, which is something called stylometry, within their own outputs, and all sorts of things. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, increasingly what we're really talking about is alien intelligence. Yeah, so we talk about AI, it's alien intelligence increasingly. From a regulator's perspective, the regulators basically are, even the recent European AI Act, it was actually put together basically by my past boss, Thierry Breton. It's out of date as soon as it comes out. You know, a lot of the AI regulations talk in terms of broad strokes. They say AI needs to be safe, but don't tell you how to build a safe AI. So with a lot of regulators, what they're having to do is they're having to do these broad brush statements now and say AI needs to be safe. If you are using it in a critical setting, you need to ensure basically that the AI is accurate. And it's like, I don't know how to do that. Now, you can test some of the bias of artificial intelligences using A/B testing. So that's one thing. You can train them using synthetic data as well and all that kind of stuff. But from a regulatory perspective, regulators are way behind. So you've got to remember that some of these artificial intelligences, like the ones from Google DeepMind, Google's DeepMind artificial intelligence will create its own algorithms and then, depending on particular inputs, evolve that algorithm and improve it with no human oversight. There's no governance, there's no reporting. The AI won't actually say, by the way, I updated this algorithm so that this output is now like this. So from a company perspective, it does put you in a quandary, because if you're using these increasingly intelligent and powerful tools to provide investment advice, and a client says, right, you've done something I don't like, I'm now going to sue you, you've got no cover, pretty much. I do a lot of work with lawyers, you know, like DLA Piper, Denton's, all these kinds of, you know, Wiggins and those kinds of guys, Allen and Overy. And when we actually have a look at, say, for example, the financial advisor basically being sued because the advice that was given was actually wrong, but that advice actually came from an artificial intelligence that was based in the US data center, there aren't precedents. And this is sort of one of the responsibilities that the financial advisor associations really need to have, because they are the links to government. And they need to be able to go to, say, the FCA and the government and say, look, as a financial advisor, we want to start using these tools, but we have these questions. And we need the FCA and the regulators to provide clear guidance on what's okay, what's not okay, and what to look out for. But the problem is that the FCA and the regulators have broad brushstrokes, and they go, well, you need to make sure it's safe. You need to make sure it's accurate. You need to make sure that the information that you're providing to your clients basically isn't biased. And it's like, well, I don't have access basically to the source code, shall we say, of OpenAI's $90 billion artificial intelligence, because actually as these AIs have been developed, we're finding that the early GPT models, OpenAI would say, we trained it on these data sets. This is what we did. But as they commercialize these AIs, we're saying, okay, so how have you trained these? You know, what corpus of data have you trained them on? All of a sudden, companies like OpenAI are going, not telling you. And it's like, well, hang on, if we don't know what you've trained it on or how you've trained it, then we don't really know the accuracy of the outputs. And therefore, from a regulatory perspective and an industry perspective, we have no idea basically what you could be spitting out junk. So it does put everyone in a very difficult position, in which case, when we come back to those use cases, as independent financial advisors, you've got to be very careful with your use cases and say, what use cases can I use AI for that if everything went sideways, I'm not going to get sued the hell out of? You know, and things like marketing is an easy one, because, you know, I can go, your marketing's really awful, but I'm not going to sue you for it. But using it for investment reports, you know, where you say, you know, the UK real estate market is white hot according to the AI, and in 2024 it expects to see returns of 65%, and everyone piles in. You need to be very clear as financial advisors that any reports or any data or any material that you put together is incredibly heavily caveated and that the T's and C's and the conditions of the people reading those basically is actually covered. So you say, look, we're providing you with this report, but do not, this report is not investment advice. Completely ignore it. Those T's and C's at the bottom. This investment report might be completely made up. Do not do anything with it. Do not invest with it. And if you do, you're an idiot, etc. You do it like that. So the only way I can see, because I have the same issue basically within my business, the only way that I can actually see financial advisors really getting to grips with what is a genuinely powerful, capable technology that changes the game on so many different levels is to ensure that you are properly covered from a legal and contractual perspective. Cover everything. Even to the point, basically, where when you're actually signing up new clients, you say, as a new client, we may or may not provide you with stuff that has been contributed to or generated by an artificial intelligence. And as a result, all of these reports, which might be clearly marked, etc., should be ignored. They are not investment advice. If you have any queries about whatever these AIs have produced, you come and talk to us. Caveat the hell out of it. And that way, if everything goes sideways and you are taken to court for whatever reason, then you have a level of cover.
It seems to me that for most people, apart from the big multinationals who can throw billions at things, AI is the equivalent of a calculator. Maths is a lot easier with a calculator. Yeah. You don't need to have one, but it's a lot easier with one. But you still need to put the numbers in, you need to understand what the output is. If you just stuck a lot of numbers in a calculator, it could be the right answer, but unless you knew the answer, you wouldn't know. And I think that certainly when I use any form of AI, you have to validate the outcome. Yeah. It's a great tool to help you get some of the way there, most of the way there.
Well, this is it. And you should really look at it as, say, for example, an office apprentice, where you bring in a relatively generalized office apprentice and you have a number of jobs and tasks that you need to do as a business. And that apprentice is okay at some stuff, but they don't necessarily have field experience. They're not necessarily trustworthy because they're an apprentice, you don't know them, you just sort of come in. Treat it as an apprentice. However, as we see with some apprentices say, well, you used to work this way, why aren't you working this way? But it happens to be an apprentice that has the expertise, and expertise is a cautious word, the expertise of thousands of different jobs, tasks, roles, and everything else.
I like that. Yeah, an apprentice.
But as with all of these new technologies, the way that I'm approaching their use is you caveat everything. You figure out your use cases. What's causing you? What are you losing sleep over? What are you losing sleep about? What's costing you a lot of money? What's costing you a lot of time? What isn't giving you the return on that investment that you wanted? Whatever it happens to be. What are you spending a lot of time on that is minimal to your business, incremental to your business? Those are the use cases that you start playing around with. And then on the back of that, literally, you phone up a couple of lawyers and say, if we are going to be using artificial intelligence within our business, and these are the areas that we're going to use it, what contract do I need to put in front of new clients to completely protect myself? Because you also got to remember, when you go to the theme parks, you go to a lot of theme parks, or even the trampoline parks. When you go to the trampoline parks, you're signing away that if you break your neck and you die horribly, in a trampoline park, that the operators aren't liable.
It's your own fault.
Yeah, exactly. You need that kind of cover basically for AI.
Okay.
And that's the easiest way I can think of that companies can start using AI, exploring AI, experimenting with AI, however, have the legal protections that they actually need. That means that if things do go sideways, companies can't bankrupt you.
So, university for you was North Wales, marine biology.
That's it.
How do you go from being a marine biologist to now being a futurist?
So the story there basically is I took marine biology and oceanography at University College North Wales. I then ended up doing some work with the UNHCR basically on environmental protection, coral reefs out of Belize and all that kind of stuff. Came back to the UK, found out basically that if you're an oceanographer and marine biologist, then realistically the only jobs that you actually had available were dredging water out of the Thames. Pretty much, literally like that. So that kind of then forced a little bit of a life change. I then ended up getting a job in distribution, selling networking gear and all that kind of stuff. Then ended up at EMC. So was heading up the healthcare units basically within EMC, then the enterprise units within EMC. Got headhunted by IBM, so then ended up heading up IBM's PSNS business, which is the Homeland Security and National Security businesses within IBM. Did well there, but from an emerging technology perspective, when you have a look at any business, one of the biggest problems that IBM had is every time we went for a tender, and these were typically $100 to $250 million outsourcing agreements, you'd get in front of the CFO of an AstraZeneca or whoever it happened to be, and they would say, okay, why you, why not HP? Or, these kinds of organizations. And the vast majority of organizations are actually quite commoditized. There's very little differentiation. You'd say, well, the reason why us is because we've got great references, we've got a very deep bench of experts, we've done it before, we've got the scale, we can de-risk it, got the project managers and everything else, which is exactly what other companies like HP basically would say, and so on and so forth, or Tata or TCS or HCL. And when I was dealing basically with the national security agencies, they wanted to see not just what was coming, but what was coming after what was coming, and what was coming after what was coming. So sort of N+2, N+3 generation technologies. So I built blue sky forums out basically for GCHQ down in Cheltenham and all these kinds of things. And actually on the one hand enjoyed it, but also saw companies like IBM at that particular point being disrupted. So IBM kind of saw cloud coming, but didn't really pay any attention to it whatsoever. Cycled about 50,000 people out of the business because they were disrupted. Told those people, goodbye, thanks for coming, nice to have you. Here's a CV writing service and 3 months worth of severance. Hope you have a great life. And I thought, on one hand, if these organizations are so bad at actually not just seeing what was coming, but then quantifying it and developing a strategy to go and own that disruptive new threat, then that was, on the one hand, that was a travesty. Because even at that point, basically, we saw 250,000 people being made redundant out of the technology industry because Amazon was on the rise, Microsoft Azure was on the rise. I just thought that was a ridiculous way to do it. And so companies typically care about three things: reduce cost, reduce risk, and improve revenues. Everyone can talk about reduce cost, reduce risk. Get rid of people, move to the cloud, digitize, there you go. But when it comes to new markets, when it comes to actually revenue growth, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but it's very difficult to see. And that's what I was actually doing with a lot of IBM's customers. I left IBM, got headhunted by Atos. I headed up Atos's cloud business, which was fun and everything else, and then ended up leaving there because I was, again, even though I was global head of channel sales and all that sort of stuff at Atos, still felt like a cog in the machine. They'd sort of say, here's $60,000, go and build a business unit that's a multi-billion-dollar business unit, and if you'd have to triple roll people and all that kind of stuff, which was nuts. First clients basically were kind of Sainsbury's, the rugby, the RFU as well, the Rugby Football Union, Nike, those kinds of guys. And it's good being able to see beyond the horizon. But also, I feel basically it's good being able to see beyond the horizon to see what the opportunities are, but also what the threats are, a little bit like we talked here. Because there are always opportunities and threats. And when we have a look at future-related matters, we can all talk about artificial intelligence's role basically in the future of work. We can see AI automating jobs. But if I automate a job like a coder, and I put an interesting interface over the top of that, I democratize coding for 3.5 billion connected people. So technology always has these two flip sides, like we talked dystopia and utopia before. But when you have a look at all of the next generation products and services, the things that are coming, you've got to have an understanding of what problem are we solving. And then we often solve that problem today using technology. So if you don't understand the technologies or don't understand how they can be combined together to create the next generation solutions, then you can't see next generation markets or next generation problems. And so, yeah, it's, and then I'm an information hog anyway, basically. So, yeah, it takes me everywhere.
And you've been going now for?
So it was about, actually 8 years now. So I'm going to be producing the 2024 Griffin Emerging Technology Starburst, which has got, 300 emerging technologies up to the year 2075 on it. Nice little poster, as well as the books and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the clients are getting everywhere, including the clients basically we're using today. That's it. And it's, yeah.
If people haven't seen the Starburst, well worth having a look. Very interesting to see just the sheer scale of new technology that's coming out for the future.
Well, even when we have a look at artificial intelligence, we've got liquid AIs, chemical AIs, polymer AIs, we've got AIs made out of DNA, we've got 3D printed artificial intelligences, and then in a couple of years' time, if not really already, we've got quantum artificial intelligence, which will make ChatGPT basically look like a stone. You know, so and this is the thing. It's today. We kind of alluded to it earlier. A lot of people think that the pace of change is too fast. And when we actually think about that pace of change, if we step back 100 years ago, we had a 10-mile long road, and we were in a car doing 10 miles an hour, and we had an hour to see what was at the end of that 10 miles, and then we had in that hour we could plan and plot and figure out what is it, why is it, how do we adapt to this thing that's at the end of the road. Now we've still got that kind of 10-mile road, but we're now doing 100 miles an hour. And so the amount of time that we actually have to see these changes, like ChatGPT, I've been tracking ChatGPT-like technologies for 10 years, even before basically I started 311. These things all of a sudden emerge. Within the space of 6 months, basically the entire world changed. Every industry was like, wow, AI's here, let alone everything else. And so now basically we have that 10-mile road, but we're traveling at 100 miles an hour. And as a futurist, what I'm trying to do is we are still traveling at 100 miles an hour, but I'm now trying to make that road 100 miles long. So we still have our hour that we can see it, figure out whatever that thing is at the end of the road, plan and adapt to it. So by extending our vision out to sort of quite a way, depending on who I'm working with, suddenly we can now talk about what happens when artificial general intelligence starts hitting the market. What's the impact of that? What's the good stuff? What's the bad stuff? What do the regulators need to know?
I think that makes your job even more vital for companies and governments alike, really, I think.
Which is why I sort of get called into what I get called into. Yeah.
So as our regular listeners will know, we finish every episode with a quick-fire question round. These are a series of short questions designed to find out a bit more about the person we've been speaking to. Are you ready for your quick-fire questions, Matthew? I'll start easy. What's your favourite thing to do at the weekend?
See the kids and the family.
That was a quick-fire answer.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because I travelled so much and everything else. So yeah,
okay,
you've got to be centred.
Let's go a bit deeper. Yeah. What motivates you?
So I believe basically that everyone has it within them to be almost limitless. When we actually have a look at humanity, the human condition, as kids, basically, we're always told by our parents, the only thing that you can be is everything you want to be. We're always told by scientists and by zoos, ironically, basically, that we are the most complex and special beings in the entire universe. And then at some point, as we start hitting 20s and coming out of universities or schools, we say, right, this is the single career, the single job, the single thing that you're going to be doing until you retire, provided AI doesn't come and get you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, I tend to think, basically, that a lot of us, basically, we have this limitless potential. Now, if you actually have a look at the problems that we've created, but also the solutions that we've actually created, the things that we've built, we're not just talking about giant artificial intelligences that rival human intelligence. We're talking about tractor beams, we're talking about holograms, we're talking about being able to feed the planet because we can take the cell from an animal, put it in a bioreactor and grow a beef burger out of it. The human ingenuity basically is literally limitless. And I think basically as humans and as individuals, we actually forget how special our place is, not just within society, but also within the universe. And when we have a look at these increasingly powerful technologies, trying to actually use them to benefit people, but to actually help people realize basically their limitless potential, that's everything that I'm about. So for example, we talked earlier about what would you do if the only thing that you had access to was all the world's knowledge. When we have a look at skills, if we are automating jobs and therefore democratizing skills and jobs via a nice interface like programming, if you can suddenly have the skill of a programmer, what would you create? So not only are we democratizing access to all the world's knowledge, we're democratizing access to all the world's skills. But then on top of that, if we created something here today, say like this podcast, if we could execute properly, 3.5 billion people on the planet could hear it by the end of the day. In which case, we also have the ability to change the world at a speed and scale that is unimaginable. We have more power in our hands now, basically, than past kings and queens ever did. So when we talk about how do we use that, when we come back to kind of the Japanese ikagi, what happens basically when, as an individual, the only power that you have is pretty much everything. But sometimes you just have to remind people of, when you pick up your phone and you Google stuff, you have access to all the world's information. Add AI in and it's knowledge. And they go, oh, well, yeah. And that's, certainly as we start looking at this sort of future world that we're creating, that's one of people's biggest challenges. If AI automates you or your job or the thing that you care about, and the only thing that you have access to is all the world's knowledge, all the world's skills and everything else, then what is it you really want to do? We're not actually really afraid of being automated. We're afraid of the change. When I am automated, I don't think I could go and get another job. That's what we're afraid of.
I think I go off those listing numbers, actually. If you can help me out with that, that'd be great. What's something you've always wanted to do but haven't yet had the chance to?
So I want to go into space. So a little while ago, I actually helped the Google X Prize land some drones on the moon. Actually, the Indian team actually crashed their drones on the moon. So technically, I'm actually partly responsible for space litter already on the moon. But actually, that experience, of being able to build a drone, basically, build a lunar rover in that particular case, put it onto a Falcon 9 SpaceX rocket and send it and crash it on the moon in the end. That was quite weird because actually you're looking up at the moon going, I've littered that. But but the cost of actually accessing space has now fallen over 100-fold. And it's come down from about $2.5 billion per ticket to about $250,000 per ticket, and it's going to continue to decrease, so maybe in 20 years.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I think if I had the opportunity, I would.
Yeah.
There are many that said they wouldn't. I'd love to see it.
So astronauts, so I do a lot of work with NASA, basically, and the NASA astronauts talk about something called the orbital perspective. And with school children, we've taken children onto a virtual reality international space station. And the astronauts have this orbital perspective where they look back on Earth and all they see is this blue dot in space. There are no country boundaries, there's no politics, no wars, all that kind of stuff, and it just looks serene. And the closest I've got to that basically is when I took the students onto the ISS in virtual reality. And the virtual reality constructs we'd actually built basically are so good that for a moment you could fool yourself that you were actually looking back down on Earth. And that was quite sobering.
I bet it was.
Yeah.
What's something you've changed your mind about in the last year?
So I suppose I've changed my mind almost entirely on exponential, on the term exponential. So as we see the pace of change accelerating and accelerating, a lot of people, including futurists, often talk about the role of exponential technologies. And what they really mean basically is they kind of harken back basically to Moore's law, and they say, a lot of technologies today are exponential. Moore's law, the power of a computer chip would double every 18 months, and the cost of that computer chip would halve every 18 months. So the cost performance would halve, would improve exponentially over time. Increasingly, I talk not really in terms of exponential technology. I talk in terms of exponents technology. Now, there's a reason for that. So, exponential, which is the doubling of, say, computer power, is what we call an exponent. But when we actually have a look at artificial intelligence, for example, is improving at a rate that is greater than Moore's law. However, I saw a little while ago, about a year ago, basically, I came across a new technology, basically, which I call meta-compute. So no one has ever seen meta-compute. Like I was talking about generative artificial intelligence 10 years ago. I've seen artificial intelligences that will create computers within games like Minecraft. They will make computers out of redstone brick. So, any kids that play Minecraft, So any kids that play Minecraft, they will go in, they'll use all these different blocks and bricks basically to make something. So we've had an artificial intelligence that made a computer in Minecraft that was 70 stories tall in Minecraft. It has a speed of 1 hertz. But that computer can actually run another artificial intelligence that can design a computer within itself and exponentially improve itself. So what we have is, when we think about exponential technology, we kind of think in terms of physical technologies, computer chips, doubling of performance and cost performance every sort of 18 months. We then have digital technologies, which are increasingly developing at a rate much faster than Moore's law ever used to. But we now have AIs developing computers basically within virtual simulations that can run AIs that develop computers within themselves, that run AIs that run computers within themselves, and so on and so forth. So you end up basically with this multiverse kind of analogy. And when you have a look at these technologies, these computer systems, when the AIs get sufficiently sophisticated enough, they could start developing new software-based, virtual-based computer platforms at light speed, which then takes us from an exponential technology like Moore's law to God knows what you would actually call that. So increasingly, and this will sort of be in the 2024 releases, I talk more in terms of exponents technology, because exponents is a doubling of technology, a trebling of technology, a to the power of 4, to the power of 5, to the power of 6, to the power of 7.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And
wow.
It's the speed. A lot of people, when you really start taking the covers off some of the technologies that are kind of in the labs, on that meta-computer is called Chungus, by the way. When you start taking the cover off some of the technologies that we're developing in the labs, as I've said, basically they make things like ChatGPT look positively caveman-like.
Wow. What's the greatest life lesson you've learned?
Listen.
That's good advice, I think. Good advice for everybody.
Yeah, so on that little point, I think it's important to actually listen to people. So listen to people basically from all backgrounds, be open-minded about what they actually say. As we see an increasingly polarized society, part of the reason why we have a polarized society is because we are less willing to sit down with one another any longer and actually listen to the other people's viewpoints and then discuss it. There is increasingly a fear of discussing different viewpoints. And we see that with children especially. But one of the skills that Nelson Mandela actually had, basically as a leader, was he would let everyone else actually talk first, and then he would talk last. Because as a leader, if you talk first and say, it is my opinion that AI is great, then everyone else will typically go, I also think AI is great, and everything else. So if you listen first, and you listen to everybody else in the room first, then you hear what they're genuinely thinking without your thoughts or your opinions biasing what they're saying. But then also listening is important anyway.
And last question, what advice would you give to your 10-year-old self?
So the honest advice that I would actually give myself, basically in an ideal world, which no one would actually like. So if you have children listening, I advise basically that you send them out of the room now, would be quit school.
Really?
Now the reason for that is I do a lot of work on the future of education for typically G7, G20 governments. When you actually have a look at today's curriculum, it was generally created 100 years ago. The exams that the children are taking today basically were typically set by the Oxford and Cambridge examination boards in the 1960s. I speak to lots of headmasters basically that, that's actually what the headmasters say, not me. When you have, one of these students basically that I actually teach basically said, how come education today teaches us about the past but not the present or the future, which I thought was blimey, that's actually quite accurate but also pejorative. But then when we actually have a look, for example, at the power that technology's actually had today, how many schools, while it is very important to get the foundations right, English, maths, sort of science basics, all that sort of right, how many schools are actually teaching children about artificial intelligence, coding, robotics, Web3, metaverse, crypto? I speak to lots of financial or lots of economics teachers, and they say we have been specifically told by schools and by boards not to talk about cryptocurrencies because it's not in the national curriculum. And yet, if you are learning economics, you come out of school, you are instantly going to be in some form of world related to crypto. So a lot of the entrepreneurs that I speak to, a lot of the people that I speak to, a lot of the parents that I speak to say when it comes to their daily lives, they only really use or rely on 20 to 30% of what they actually learned at school in their daily lives, which then means we're sending kids to school for 20 years for only 70% of that time to be pretty much, being very careful with the word, being less relevant than it could be. I mean, how many times have any of us actually thought about Pythagoras' theorem or photosynthesis or the Krebs cycle, etc., etc.? Schools basically are teaching to a curriculum that is 100 years old. Not that many schools teach kids about the actual real world or current technologies. How many schools are teaching kids to be entrepreneurs? How to do marketing, how to do a P&L, how to balance finances. And I know basically that there are going to be teachers basically saying, yes, we do, etc., etc. But I have a lot of teachers basically actually at my back, and I work with some of the world's largest schools groups because increasingly the world that education is trying to prepare our children for doesn't work like the past. And our kids are going into a future that operates by fundamentally different rules. And it is a world that is increasingly, like it or not, dominated by some form of technologies. And you go into schools and say, what can our children be? And they say, well, lawyers and all this sort of stuff. I can show you AI lawyers with Law Geeks and Ross and all this sort of stuff that actually got sued and made bankrupt, ironically, by another AI lawyer. So I would have actually dropped out of school, given if I was able, and I would have travelled the world, and I would have sucked up different experiences, and then I would have learned what I wanted to learn. Which ironically is actually what quite a lot of the world's billionaire polymaths actually also advocate. Steve Jobs did it, Larry Ellison sort of did it, albeit they were older, even Elon Musk.
Is this why you created the university?
Yeah, so Exponential University. And even Jeff Bezos actually has created his own universities. Jack Ma, basically, who obviously founded Alibaba in China, basically says that the education system isn't really preparing children for the future, so he actually quit. That's a whole story, but he actually quit Alibaba and actually went back to his hometown to become a teacher. So it's, and when you speak to when I'm doing events, a lot of parents will come over to me and go, how do we prepare our children for this future? And they can see it today, in a whole variety of different ways. But I mean, just on that point, so I used ChatGPT to help my daughter skip an entire year's worth of school. So we actually used ChatGPT to accelerate her learning sixfold because, long story short, she'd been bullied badly in year 4. School didn't deal with it very well at all. The only choice we had was to move her down a year to get her away from the bullies. Bullies then left and all got expelled. There were 2 of them. And she wanted to go back to year 5 in this particular case, which meant she would have missed year 4 of the UK national curriculum. And we used artificial intelligence over the summer basically to accelerate her learning 6-fold. And she's now in year 5 and doing well. But she's also dyslexic. So when we talk about the benefits of these technologies, when we talk about how well prepared our children are for a world with these technologies, for better or worse, I do tend to think that next year I am going to get much more vocal on education, although I am very careful. I have a lot of respect for teachers, I work with a lot of teachers, I know it's all hard, but the national curriculums of really any country are not preparing our children for the future that is here today. Virtual reality, augmented reality, world building, crypto, anyone wants to argue with me on that, I'll tell you what, they're going to find it difficult. But I do invite criticism because I'm open-minded and like to listen. So, yeah.
Matthew, this has been a genuine eye-opener. Some of the concepts we talked about hadn't even crossed my mind until we sat down together. So I really do thank you ever so much for your time. If people want to find out more about you and the work that you do, they should head to...
So you can go to 311institute.com and fanaticalfuturist.com, and there's lots of social links there. So if people want to keep up to date, then I've got codexes, which everything's free. So I open source everything. You can learn about all of the latest emerging technologies and trends on the planet, basically just by downloading the codexes off the 311 Institute website. The YouTube channel, which is Fanatical Futurist or 311 Institute, again, because I've got multiple of those. That's where I put a lot of the talks, basically on whatever it is that I'm talking about, whether it's cyber, whether it's whatever. So all of the content that I produce basically is free, because we want to democratize access to the future so that we can invite debate and people are aware of what's actually coming and then can have an opinion on it and then hopefully ideally figure out how to prepare for it and then prepare for it.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much for your time. It's been brilliant talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Ben. Cheers.